Okay, hi everyone. So this is the video companion for week 6 at the environmental technician course at Niagara College in the data management class. And today we're getting a little bit more into some of the nitty-gritty of how we work with data kind of wholesale. Up to now, we've been looking at a couple of specific issues where we might want to be calculating statistics, we might want to be using pivot table to summarize data, but this week we're talking more about kind of how we organize data in general, and that's the concept of a database. And when we think about a database, it's really just storing different parts of the data in different tables. And as a general rule of thumb, if one thing is ever related to more than one of another thing, we store them in separate tables. And so this is a simple example from my master's research where we have a kind of simple database that stores data about research done on grassland songbirds. And so when we think about this, the kind of structure of the entire study is that we have a bunch of different sites. We go to the different sites and we do multiple surveys throughout, either one season or multiple seasons. And within each survey, we're counting multiple birds that are in each one of these. We go out to a spot, we stand there for 5 minutes, we count all of the birds that we see or hear. So in this example, this is just a what we call a database model that shows you how these different tables are connected together. And what it really shows you is that we have one table where we keep all our information about the sites, right? And that could be which type of site it is, what is the percent cover of non-native vegetation, and then we connect that to a table where we store information about the surveys. It's at a different scale. We might have multiple surveys for each one of the sites that we go to, so we store that information in another table. And that might include things like which year the survey was, what the date was, what the time was. You could have other information like observers, maybe if your methods are different, stuff like that. Things that are unique to that time that you went out there to go and do the survey. And then we have a third table where we have each of the different counts that we took within a survey. And so the way that and that would be, which species it was, what number of individuals, and maybe if you saw it or didn't see it. We can connect this to thinking about the efficiency of how we store the data, because we can look at this count table and we see that we have this kind of structure where we have, lots and lots of lines, about 24,000 lines, because each time that we see a bird, we count it, and that's what goes into this table. And so instead of putting all the information for a species, like its Latin name, its common name, what type of classification you want to put it into, we store that additionally into another table. And so each one of the 127 species that we've identified in this study has another table where we store all of this information. And so it'll become clear kind of how that increases the efficiency, because basically instead of having all of these columns with the species name, the species scientific, and the species category next to here in terms of species name, species scientific, and species category, and repeated 23,000 times, we just store it once over here, and then we can connect between those two tables to transfer that information over on something that's common between them. And so in this case, we have this column species ID, and we have this column species ID, and they're going to have the same values in each. Here, it's going to be what did we count for this one, which happens to be alder flycatcher. And then here, it's going to be what is all the information for alder flycatcher. And what we can do is we can connect between the two tables based on these common values, which we call identifiers or keys, and then we can store information in one place and transfer it over to where it needs to be in another place. So that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell. And so you can see that we have these unique identifiers across across all of our tables. We also have a couple of other tables that we haven't talked about yet, which are called site type and site category. And essentially what these are called domains. And so we call that there. And basically what this is it's a list of values that we limit another column by. So we were already talking about the species table. So we have this one, which is a list of values that we can have for the species category. A species can either be a forest, facultative, grassland bird, or water bird, a generalist bird, an obligate grassland bird, or an exotic bird. And so each one of these has that, has one of those classifications for it. So rather than, so that when we're putting data into this table, if we want to limit the types of information that people can put into it, so if I wanted to prevent someone from saying this is a fac bird instead of a facultative bird, or a you didn't want them to be able to misspell it, facultative, missing the U there, then what we can do is we can put restrictions on it. And we'll go through that also in this video. So to reiterate kind of what we're talking about for this whole subject, we're thinking about how do we store data efficiently so that we can keep everything kind of in one place and then transfer it to where it needs to be? And how do we kind of connect between tables using some of the tools that are available in Excel? Including how do we restrict people from being able to put the wrong value in the right place. So we'll go through some of the tools that are available for us now. This is just a table here that describes all of the different fields, all of the different columns, and kind of what they are. These are data types that are used in structured query language, which we're not going through here, but you can kind of get the gist of it. Like int is an integer, characters are characters, and we would have, you know, different types of things, dates and times that we could put into different columns. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the tables tool in Excel to tell it that this whole thing of 187 sites is one block of information. And there's a couple of really cool benefits that we'll go through that result from being able to do this. So the first thing that we're going to do is press Control L, or you can go to, from when we have any cell highlighted, or you can go to Format as Table. And what that does is it allows you to pick, you know, a style or whatever you want. I like this one. And it recognizes that this whole block of data that we have here, outlined in this green block, is one unit, one distinct thing that we can then refer to. We tell it that it has headers, which is just that this first row is going to be the name of the columns, and we press OK. Once we format it as a table, you can see that this table design banner pops up at the top. And so you can have different options for how you might want to treat this. We could immediately summarize it with the pivot table. We could change kind of how it looks, any of these different colors or any of these different styles here. We could tell it, do you have a header row? Do you not have a header row? Do you want to do bounded rows? Whatever. There's all sorts of different kind of visualizations that we can use for it, and some immediate kind of things that can come from it. But one of the key things that we're going to talk about today is this. And so this allows us to name what the table is so that we can refer to it when we're writing functions in Excel. So here we're going to just tell it that our table name is site by clicking there. And we're going to do this for all of our tables in this sheet. So we do Control L, we tell it that this is the range that we want and that it has headers, and then we name it the name of the sheet so that we can refer to it later. So again, we're selected on the table, Control L, click OK. Name it survey. Control L. Table has headers. Click OK. Count. Control L. Oops. Control L. My table has headers. Call it species. Control L. Table has headers, and we'll call this species category. Okay, so now we have some things that are named that allow us to refer to them in other places. So the easiest way that we can kind of connect through this data is to use functions called XLOOKUP. There's another one called VLOOKUP, which is an older version of it, but it has some limitations that I think are solved in the XLOOKUP function. So what we want to do is go to our biggest table, the one that here we have this 24,000 rows, and each one of these rows has a connection to the survey ID. So each count was conducted at a survey, which we can link to through this survey ID. And then each survey has a site which it was conducted at, which we can link to through the site ID. So what we're going to do is go to our count table, and we're going to start writing in the cell immediately beside the table. And what we can do is we can say, we're going to pull some of these columns from survey into the count data into the count table based on the match between survey ID in the survey table and in the count table. So what we do is we start to write equals, and we say XLOOKUP, and we open our function with a circular bracket. But you can see that this searches for an array, a range or an array for a match, and then returns the corresponding item from the second range or array. By default, an exact match is used. So when we open this up, it says, okay, these are the things that I need. I need a lookup value, I need a lookup array, and I need a return array. And then you can specify if it's not found, what do you want, what match mode do you want, and what search mode do you want from the bottom or from the top. So what we're going to do first is we say we want to look up our value. And in the count table, what we want to do is look up our survey ID. And now this is one of the reasons that I really like tables, because it has this cool nomenclature where it says, I'm going to look up at survey ID. And what this at in the square brackets means is I'm going to look in the table where we already are, and I'm going to look at our row in this column. And so it's for every row that it's in, it's going to look up the survey ID in that row. And you can see very clearly that it doesn't just say B2, it says which column exactly it is that it's taking. So now we can separate out and enter our second argument, which is the lookup array. So what the lookup array means is, where do you want me to look for this value? And we can start writing that we want to look it up in the survey table. And you'll see that another reason that I like tables is that when we start to write survey, you see that it's an option, and it has this little symbol beside it that it says table. So we can start writing that we want to look into the survey table. And if we want to pick a certain column from the survey table, which we do, we can do that with a square bracket. And so we say, look in the survey table at the survey ID. And we double click that. And then we can say, okay, so look in this table at this row at our survey ID, go to the survey table, which is the one beside us here, and look up the survey ID there. And then you choose which value you want it to return. So we go back to the survey table, and we say, which value do we want it to return? And the first one, we're just going to pull the site ID, which is that one that'll allow us to link to this site's table. So here we can do that. And then we have the options of specifying other things like if not found, but I can tell you that all of these will match, so we won't have to actually match if something's not found. Now we can close it with our circle bracket. And again, what this is going to do is it's going to look up the survey ID in this row. It's going to go to the survey table beside us and look up and find the survey ID there. And then it's going to return the survey site ID in the same row. The next reason that I really like tables is because when we go to enter this, it recognizes that because you're entering a function in the cell beside your table, you probably want to do it for the entire table. And it goes and immediately does it for all of these. So in all 24,000 rows, instead of us having to drag anything, it's automatically gone and done that. So we can say that this is our site type, which is our site ID rather, which is the one that we looked up here. Now, we can see that what has happened is we've looked up this survey ID bar01, 210608_1, and it goes here and it looks for that value bar01, 210608_1, and it finds the site ID, which is bar01. If we go ahead and up into the function bar, we can copy and paste this whole thing. And then we can go to the next one beside it. We can paste this, and we can say, instead of taking the survey ID, now I want to take the survey year. So now I have the survey year, and I can go ahead and take the rest of these data for the other columns. A quick digression, you'll see that our survey date is in a weird format here. It says 44,000. That's because Excel thinks of dates as numbers relative to an initial start date. So it's 44,000 days after a certain start date. I think it's 1890 or something like that. But what we can do is we can, because it's a table, as we scroll down, you can see that these options are here. So it keeps telling you what the column name is for that table. And if we just click on survey date, it highlights the whole survey date table and none of the values below it. And we can just format it as a date here. So we can choose to have it as this type of date so that we can actually visualize it like that. And we'll see that this is actually a June 8th, 2021. Or we could do any of these other formats where we might want to have it as something like this, where maybe it's a little bit more clear for us. We can do the same thing with survey time. Again, if we scroll down a couple rows, we can see that we get this option to select the entire survey time column in our survey table. And we can format this using the time, which will default to this one with AM, PM, or we can select another format where we say, let's go for time, and then let's just do the 24-hour time instead. So now you'll see that we have looked up these, we can change the way that those numbers are perceived by Excel, and it still maintains the actual value underlying it. But here, that's just a brief digression. What we're doing now is we're again pulling the data from these different things, and so we can into our table where we can actually be able to analyze them. So we can, instead of doing survey year, now maybe we want to pull over the survey date. You see that it does that same thing where it just pulls over the numbers associated with the date, but we know now that we can highlight this whole column and just change how that's visualized. And we can do this also for our time. But so you can play with that and you can pull over all of these columns, including time. But now let's just do that last one. So survey time. Survey time, and then we can highlight this whole column and we can call it time. So now what we've done is we've pulled over all of these pieces of data. And so for all of these surveys, which are bar 01, this one, you can see that we pulled over all of the exact same data from the survey table. So for this one survey, bar 01 210608-1, we have 127 rows corresponding to each of the species, and we have counts and presents, and it's pulled over all of this same information just based on that match. We can do the same thing now with all of the other tables. So if we started writing our function again, we start writing equals XLOOKUP. And instead now we'll link to the site table so we can pull over the site. And again, we have that in this row. We can look it up in the site table and we can pull in both of the different types of data. We want to match it, sorry, on the site ID. So that's our lookup array. Our return array is going to be whichever one we're looking up. So it'll be site type. And we can close our bracket and pull all that over. So this column is our site type, and it's matching our site ID, so bar 01, and it's pulling in that column and matching it for all of the sites that are, all of the surveys that are at this site. So bar 01 site is modified grassland, and so in our count table, it's pulling in all of that information. So at all of the bar 01 sites, we see that it's modified. And if we release that, we can see that we've updated this for all of the values in this table. We can copy this again, Control C, do it again, and we can bring over our, instead of our site type, our site non-nat, which is the percent cover of non-native vegetation, name that. And then we've pulled in 3 of those tables. The last table that we're going to pull in some information from is our species table. And so we can pull in our species name, species scientific, and species category matched on the species ID. So we come here and we say equals XLOOKUP. We say we want to look up the value, the species ID, which is the value that we have in the other table. We match it to the species table, species ID. And then we pull in other information from that species table, which might be the species name. And then we can pull those in. So that's species name. We can copy and paste this. We can pull in the scientific. Species scientific. And we can do our last one, which is the species category. So now what we've done is instead of having this table with just the count data here, we've been able to add all of this other data that's linked to it, but stored in other tables. And instead of having to write out that this survey borrow 1 was at site borrow 1 and was conducted in 2021, however many hundreds of times, we were able to write it out once. In this one, this is the information for borrow 1, this is the information for that survey, and we were able to bring it over for all of the observations that we have when we conducted that survey. So from here, what we could use are some of our other tools like pivot tables if we wanted to analyze the data and start to do things. So from here, we could do insert and we could make a pivot table. And this is just an example. So we'll put it in a new worksheet. And now we have all of these things to play with. And so we could start to do things like, if I go to survey year, how many birds were observed in total. And so if we sum all of the count, which is the number of individuals observed, then we can see that in our, we'll call this XLOOKUP pivot, we can see that the total is in 2021 is this much, and we could even add other variables in here. So in 2021, we observed almost 1,100 birds, almost 3,000 birds in 2022. And we could even split that up by the type of site, where we say in haylands, we observed this many. And I think you can see how we could manipulate this to try and get at some interesting information about this data set. And we would be able to answer a bunch of different questions. So that's the function way that we can do this, but there are a couple of other ways that we can actually relate through all of these data sets. I'm going to do those at the end of the video, but there's just a couple more things that I wanted to show you that are related to kind of these general Excel tools that are going to help you in almost any situation that you get to. So the first one is data validation. So if we go to our species table, right now, I could write in some dumb bird. I could write in whatever values that I wanted for the species category. But if you wanted to restrict whoever was putting the data in to being able to only enter in these values, there's a really cool way that we can do that. So the first way is it's through what we call data validation. So what we can do is we have to first create a named list. So we can go to this, we can highlight all those values here, and we can we can either go up here and do our name manager, or we can press the keys Alt-IND, and that will take us here as well. So you see here we have all of our tables named, and this one, which was named before from a thing that I was practicing on. But we can see that we have all of these ranges, and we can do that. But we can also create named ranges that we can just refer to. So if this case, we want to have the species category as just being a list that we can refer to in data validation, we select new, and we say species category. And you can see here that this nomenclature is saying that I'm going to go to the species category table. I'm going to take the whole species category, and then we're going to name it species category list. So we have our name here, and this will be the list that we refer to get those values, and it refers to this table. So now we have this thing, species category list, and we have still not affected our table. So now we tell this column that we only want it to be able to use that list of values. So we highlight the whole thing by scrolling down a little bit and selecting that species category. And again, that just gets the values within the table. We go to data, and we click this little plus or stop sign there, and that takes us to data validation. So you'll see that we have all sorts of options. So if you want to prevent people from being able to put whole numbers that are less than 0, then you can do that. If you want it to, and you have all these different restrictions. If you want to put a time, you want to make sure that they're putting a date that's greater than today. If they're doing a decimal that's, between certain values, you can do all of those different specifications. But when we want to limit it to a list of values that we've already named, we just say allow a list. And our source is going to be equal to that species category list. That's the thing that we just went and named there. And we press OK. So now you can see that we have this option, first of all, of the little drop down, which says that these are all the different ones. But if you go in and you try and this time write some dumb bird, it's going to say, oh, that's not okay. That value doesn't match the restrictions for this cell. Try again. You can also customize these options with some of these things. So if instead of it saying that's not within it, I wanted to say use the categories in the species category table, then you could do that. And now if I tried to write some dumb bird, in this one, it would say use the categories in the species category table. So this is our list. It's exactly identical to that one. The other benefit that we have from this is we can actually update this list and change the values. And so if I wanted to now allow somebody to write that we can categorize them as some dumb bird, if I write it right below, it adds it into this table, which automatically updates the list for here. And so now I can go ahead and call all of the birds in this category some dumb bird. So that's a cool way that we could kind of restrict what we can enter into certain cells, and that could be really useful when we're doing data entry. And so this is a lot when we're thinking about it all at once. But when we think about how we structure our tables and how we want to link our data together, it can make our work much more efficient so that we're not repeating things over and over when we're writing them and doing data entry, and that we're restricting people to being able to actually only put the right thing in the right place. The last thing that I wanted to show you guys, which I think is a really fun one, is conditional formatting for entire rows. And so let's say that we wanted all of the forest rows to be green. What we can do is we go to this Home tab and we select conditional formatting. And there's all sorts of different things where we can, do text that contains, and we can do formatting for these different things. And so, for example, if I wanted to just do the text that contains forest, then you can make it all light red with dark red text, but that doesn't do the whole row. So I could do that rule, and then everything that's forest would look red. But we can instead go to manage rules, and we can just get rid of that rule, delete it. You click apply and it'll go away. We can go to new rule, and we can say use a formula to determine which cells to format. And we can, and right in here and it says format values where this formula is true. And so what we do is we say equals $D2. So this cell here equals forest. And what that's going to do is it's going to look for this cell. It's going to look in this column D, and it's going to say if it's in this row 2, then and it equals forest, then we're going to format it, and we'll just make it. We can, change it so that it formats what type it is. We could change the font, the border, but we'll just make it into so that it comes up as green. And then we go ahead and we click OK, and you can see that this right now applies to the whole column there. So that's right now going to give us the same thing that we had before. But if we want it to apply to the whole table, we just say apply this to the species table. And what that's going to do is apply it to all of those there. And so again, what we did is we go to conditional formatting. We go to manage rules, delete that one. We say new rule, use formula, and we pick you use the $sign to say which column. So D, we put the first value of our things there. So D2, we say, what do we want the value to be? Equals forest. We choose what our format is, just green. We click OK. And then we choose the range that we want it to apply to. And we can just tell it, apply it to the whole species table. And we say OK. And now all of the values in the table that are forest show up as green. So that's just a quick way that we can use both data validation and conditional formatting to kind of help us visualize the data as we're working through it in Excel. Okay, so if you're already mind blown by this, that's probably good enough for you today. If you want to learn a couple of more methods, what I'm going to do now is show you how to connect these tables using Power Query, and then we'll also go through how to connect the tables using Power Pivot. So the first way here is Power Query. So what we have to do is we know that if we right click and we go to get data from table or range, then we can bring this table into our Power Query. So what we can do now is it says that's the source of the data. So it pulls that source, and then we could do different options for it and create a query that draws from that source of data. If we click close and load, it'll load it as a separate table. But what we actually want to do is just bring them into Power Query so we can join them all together. So if from that Power Query, we select the close and load to, and we just exit out, then you see that we just have this connection to the data. And so we'll do that again with our survey. So get data from table or range, close and load to, and we just exit out of that, and it creates this connection. We'll do it to count, get data from table or range, close and load to, exit out, creates a connection. We'll go to species, get data from table or range, close and load to, exit out. And the reason that I like this method also is because we're going to do what we took us, a couple of minutes to write those functions out for. But if we go into Power Query, and now we see that we have this queries and connections, we can go and edit our count query. And we can actually do all this in a much more replicated way that allows us to kind of put it all together and just tell Excel to do it without us having to write any of the actual functions. So we're going to duplicate our count query by writing, by right-clicking and going to duplicate. And we're going to rename this one count joined. So we're going to join this table with all of our other tables, just the way that we did with functions before. And to do that, we just go to merge queries. We select the table that we want to connect it to. So we want to join our count joined table with survey. And we can join it based on the survey ID. We click both of those. it tells us that it matched all of the selections, and we press OK. Here, it tells us that survey is connected to a table, and so we can just press this little button up here, and this is going to expand all our values. We can unclick the use original column name as prefix, and you can see that it's brought over all of the values from survey, all of the values from our count joined tape. Oh, you know what it was? I was drawing from the existing count table, so it already had all of this data in it. But let's just delete this and we'll catch up there. So if instead of grabbing our count table, we're going to go back, keep our changes, and we're going to make a copy of this table somewhere else. So we'll copy this by right-clicking and going to copy. And it might break the computer. All right. Here we go. So that has our table there, and we'll just go ahead and delete all of the columns that we connected to it. So just delete all those. And we'll pull this in as our count table. We'll call this count. Then we can duplicate it and call it our count join. So we again merge queries, and we say that we want to choose which table we want to connect it to, which is our survey table. We select the columns we want it to match on, and it tells us, okay, I can do that. And now it's brought in all of those things. We just have to expand it. And so now it has all of those columns there. We select merge queries again, and we can connect it very quickly to our site table. If we match it by the sites, and it said again, I've matched all of those. We can expand this one. And then we can do it one more time, and we can match it to the species table based on the species ID. We just click both those, and we click OK. Expand. And now we have all of these columns. From this, we can get rid of our duplicates, which might include that one, our species there. We can get rid of our extra site ID, and we can get rid of our extra survey ID. And now if we close and load this, we'll see that we have a table that just automatically kind of takes all of that data and puts it all together. So I apologize for kind of messing around a little bit with that thing. You'll see that we have these extra ones here. This is just because we created that extra query, and we can go ahead and just delete that one. So now we have our count data where we've done it with the XLOOKUP. We have our count, which is just our raw data. And we have our one where we were able to join them all together using Power Query. So I'll call this count XLOOKUP. And this will just be count. And then this is our count join. So now we have all of those things connected together. And again, we could go and we could further analyze this with Power Query, or we could analyze it using something like a pivot table and get similar stuff to what we had done with our XLOOKUP. The last one that we can use is we can actually define relationships between our tables and then bring them all into a pivot table. So to do that, you have to have Power Query or Power Pivot. And so if you don't have Power Pivot, you have to go to your options and you can turn it on. I believe it's with an option here where it says Microsoft Power Pivot. If you're having trouble and you don't see this as an option, or if you're using a Mac, this won't be available, so you can turn it off right now. If you don't see this option and you're using Windows, you can do a really quick Google just to see how do I turn on Power Pivot, and it should be pretty straightforward to do so. So when we have our Power Pivot, we can have a couple of options for how to define these things. My favorite is just to go to the Data tab, and we have this little Power Data model that comes up here, and we can map our relationships. And you'll see that right now we don't have any relationships in the table, but we could define them by selecting New, and then we select which table has our info, and we'll start with our count table, which is that raw data table. And we know that we're going to link to our survey ID based on the into the survey table by the survey ID. And so these are again, the two tables that we're working with, and then the two columns that we connect them with. We click OK, and that hasn't done anything right away. But we can do that and go ahead and define the rest of our relationships. So we also want to connect between the survey table, which is going to go to the site ID, and then we connect that to the where is it here? I'm just going to go ahead and see why the site table is not in there. Close this. This is called site. So we should be able to relationships, new. It's calling it table 1 because it hasn't updated in the data model because of what I had done before, but you should see site there. And so we'll go with site ID, and we'll relate that to our survey table on site ID. Start with survey, and maybe we go to table 1. Okay, so that's just drawing on, I named this table 1 before, but again, we're just mapping out these relationships for Excel. So the last one that we need to do is between count and the species ID. And we relate that to the species table. So now you can see that we have these 3 main connections. And if we go to our data model here, we can see that basically we're drawing these lines in it. So we're saying, oh, that's not where we want to be. So we're saying, take the count table, connect it to species, take the count table, connect it to survey, take the survey table and connect it to table 1, which is actually just site. And then when we have that, we can go to any of those tables that are connected in, and we can put them into a Power Query. So if we now we can insert a pivot table from our count table, and we will you can click it and go from data model, and we'll go put it into a new worksheet. And you'll see that we have all of these options for the different tables that we have. And so we can do something very similar without doing any of that joining, and we can just specify the relationships, and we can say, take the species category. Let's try it from our 3 connected tables. So if we say table 1, which it's called, and we want the site type, it'll say site as the table for you. and we want the Hayland sites, we can go and then connect it to our other table, our count table, and we can get the total number of individuals that are there. And we could even grab information from our survey, which is our survey year, put that above there, and we end up with a pivot table that should look almost identical to the one that we have here. So this is the one drawing from our XLOOKUP. We can see that we have that information, and then this is the one that's drawing from our power pivot, just connecting the things in there, and you can see that that's the same numbers that are showing up there. So again, 3 ways that we can kind of connect between related data sets in Excel and use some of the tools at our disposal to kind of really do some powerful analyses using a tool that's quite simple at its core. So I hope that this was informative for you. If you made it this far, congratulations. Don't worry if this seems a little bit stressful at first. These are all just tools that we can use. You play around with them and you'll figure out how they can be more applicable to you. So thanks.